Welcome to the Deer Society Podcast. Here's your host, Brian Lemke.
Well, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Deer Society Podcast. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Brian Lemke. I have with me Mike Ducart and special guest Scott Threinen. If you guys have ever waterfowl hunted, you've probably heard of this gentleman sitting next to us right here and his brand Molt Gear. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. It's kind of crazy to be on a deer podcast, but I got a good story for you. So.
Hey, hunters are hunters, right? I don't care if you're waterfowl hunting or a turkey hunter or hunt out west. You know, all of us are hunters. And, you know, the interesting thing is we had Heath Baker on the podcast not too long ago, and he's a hardcore predator hunter. Now, he does do a little deer hunting, but so many of the same things, you know, apply to predator hunting and waterfowl hunting and deer hunting. So, and it's cool to get a different perspective. You know, that's what would be awesome about talking here today, you know, hearing some of your tactics. And we're going to talk a lot about, too, kind of back in the day, how you and Mike met and how things got started even with the Deer Society.
Yeah, so. Well, you know, that's really where the tie, you know, kind of started was back in the day. Scott was, I don't know if he was even in high school. Well, he must have been. You had to be driving to go out to goose hunt in the morning before he got to school. But anyway, we were hunting a field not far from here. And get out there, and somebody's already set up. And I'm looking over, and I'm like, wow, we might as well see if we can combine this situation. And here it was, this young kid. And I thought, all right, I'll teach him a little bit, you know. And so, hey, let's hunt together, this, and that. And we all got together, and all of a sudden the birds came out, and this kid just blew up on the call. He's over there hitting off on, I think it was a Tim Grounds half-breed.
Short mag.
I mean, custom call. These are hard calls to bull. And he's over there just ripping that thing out. And I'm like, holy smokes, what's going on there? Well, needless to say, we filled out pretty darn quick. But that's the first time I ever met Scott. And, you know, if you think back in the day in the waterfowl, Scott, you know, it was kind of broke down into... What would you say? I don't want to use the term click in a derogatory way, but you had your clicks, you had your grounds guys, you had your foils guys, you had your, you know, those different groups of people that would follow. And Scott was with Tim Grounds, and then you started getting into calling competitions and had some just huge success. Let's just put it this way. It takes me about 3 or 4 years or 5 years to get where Scott can get in about a year. That's how naturally talented the guy is. And, you know, even from school, got drafted in baseball, you played in the minor leagues, you were drafted by Cincinnati Reds?
Cleveland
Indians.
Yep.
And then he gets into goose calling, naturally rises to the top. How many tell me a little bit about your titles. What do you have?
I won 3 world live titles. It's the live version of it is the natural mimicking of live geese instead of a set routine. So, won 3 of those in a row. Various other contests and blah blah. But back when we met, it was probably a little bit before that time. I think we met when I was about 16 because it was me and my buddy Sam. And then you guys pulled in with the Cobles into Wilcox's Hill there in Manorville, and they had the super mag shells. We had the old Jim Cripe outlaw decoys, and I remember that day they brought the burlap. First time I sat next to a big shell, but that was a great morning. But that was, back before I really got into contest calling. It was more just, I grew up on a dairy farm outside of Manorville, and geese would come in and they'd just land in the fields behind the house. And I remember the first time I ever heard really a Canada goose was I was walking from our calf barn to our barn, and I was carrying the milk pails. I was done feeding the calves, and these 7 just giants and I look up, and they're just coming right through the barn and the shed, and they just sat down, and I'm like, how cool was that? And that Christmas, because that was in the fall, probably October, that Christmas, I got my first goose call that Christmas, which I still have on my mantle, which is the Lohman 4-in-1 interchangeable choke flute.
Lohman.
Yep, and that's on the mantle, and the rest is history. Got into short reed, had your short reed version back in the day, and that's when we met Duke, and it just kind of took off from there, but I was always infatuated with the sound of the goose, and that kind of led me into calling contests, and eventually led me into designing the own calls, and heck, here I am today doing a deer podcast. So,
well, yeah. I mean, and our relationship never really ended. I mean,
no.
You were doing your thing, competition calling, and I kind of went a different direction. I was looking at, you know what? These guys winning the contests aren't making as much money as the guy that's in Walmart. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of the direction I went. Not that I wanted to be that type of a product, but I wanted to go more towards building the company and getting into turkey calls, getting into different things, diversifying and being more mainstream. So we kind of started shifting that direction. And that's where we otherwise we would probably have been traveling together to all these different competitions and doing all that stuff.
Yeah, you were at a different, I mean, obviously older, but you can tell by the hair, but he's at a different stage where he was getting into the manufacturing and I was just getting into the, the hunting and the guiding and, the calling and stuff like that. So.
But that's really, if you think about it, that's the connection.
Yeah,
you know what
absolutely.
I mean? Because my passion and focus was not much different than yours. You know, I mean, I had my experience when these geese were coming over, and back in the day, all you did in Rochester was pass shoot.
Right.
Nobody decoyed a bird.
Right.
So I kind of came in that way, and I realized by studying these sounds that I was so freaked out about that were just, why is that goose doing that and this and that? Well, it got to a point where we're putting them on the deck in front of clients as a outfitter and all that, but that communication aspect, the ability and just the fire to learn more and to interact with these animals, that's really the connection that we had.
Well, I think, we're all hunters here, and I think as you go through your life of being an outdoorsman, you're not going to meet a lot of other hunters that hunt exactly like you. And when you meet one, it seems like you and the guy you meet and vice versa gravitate and become friends. Mm-hmm. You're not going to meet a lot, because generally speaking, when you find somebody that hunts like you, they do everything else kind of like you too. They like to do, golf or whatever it is. They're kind of competitive in the business and, or vice versa. You're not, you're just out there for a good time, whatever it is. So I think when people in the outdoors over your lifetime, you find somebody that hunts like you, you're probably friends for almost life. And that's the way it seems like it's been for me and the other, different people I've met in the industry, is that there's a long-standing relationship. I mean, that was 26 years ago, or whatever it is now.
I don't know. I can't even remember.
Yeah, 25 years ago, and, another guy that we know, Dave Gertz, I'm still friends with him,
exactly,
and it's 23 years ago we went on our first hunt. So, when you meet guys that have that drive and that competitiveness to get better at what they're doing, and especially the communication aspect, well, you're sitting here 26, years later doing a podcast. So.
Yeah, well, fast forward that a little bit. So Scott starts maturing in what he's doing with, he kind of started doing his own thing, making his own goose calls, which is, to me, a natural progression. You could see it was going to be coming, right? And so he went that direction and created this thing called the Goose Society. And I kind of watched him, at that point in time, I'm building my, different lines and this and that. And I'm getting into manufacturing and trying to, get up, and things were going really good for us. We were really getting, some nice stores. But so I watched Scott just kind of bring this platform up. And I think we even shot a couple of DVDs or some of your video in my old studio in my basement.
Absolutely. We it was the hunt. The intro to the hunt, we showed the hunt, and then we did the breakdown, and we filmed those, high quality audio and breakdown of the hunts in his the basement there where he had the studio set up. Yeah. So
and so being that, like you said, that you think alike, you hunt alike, it's all about communicating, understanding communication, whether it's verbal, nonverbal, with decoy sets, with all that stuff. It's the same thing. You just have to break it down and figure it out. So we had that connection. And anyway, so fast forward a little bit there. I got my company is really kicking in. Scott's company is really kicking in. And we get to a point where we're just, because we morphed into whitetail deer. Now, I started, waterfowl was everything to me. That's what started everything that's happening right now at Deer Society. And we fast forward, we start realizing, hey, the markets are bigger. So now I got to think like a businessman more so than a passionate hunter. Okay. So I'm thinking, well, okay, waterfowl is this many, then, deer is this many. Nobody in the whitetail industry is doing anything close to what we've done in waterfowl, understanding the animal, their behavior, their communication. So I just went after it. I literally, and it's easy to study geese because you can go down to the, park or wherever, and you look at them, you see what they're doing. And of course, as an outfitter, I was seeing them all the time. But go ahead and try and figure out how whitetails communicate. You can't just go down and see them.
Right.
So it took a lot of time, and it took a lot of effort, and you had to get extremely close to them deer to understand the breakdowns and all that stuff. So I'm really just wrapped into that big time. We're developing these new products, I got some inventions and patents, and so that's where I'm at in my life. And then we get to a point where it stabilizes, and all our people are like, hey, we need more information. We want more. We want to know more. We want to know more. We want to know more. And that's when I'm like, the light came on. I'm like, you know what? Why don't we create a deal like Scott's Society with the Deer Society? So I called him up and I asked him, I said, hey, do you mind if we do that? With intentions of someday maybe we would even be partners at some level in some way, and keep expanding this society thing. And so that's really how the Deer Society got started. A lot of it had to do with Scott. We named it the Society because we love what he was doing.
Yeah. It was always welcome to the Goose Society.
Well, that explains a lot. That's where it came from then.
Right, yeah. No, I remember when Duke called me, and I thought it was a great idea because, you were getting into that communication aspect in the in the whitetail. And, when you watch a lot of, I wasn't a whitetail hunter at that time. And when you watched it, it was kind of like, guy sitting there during the rut. He's hoping one walks by. There was no communication on it. So, and what they were doing, I thought it was a great idea. And, he's obviously exploded it since then. So, yeah.
Well, going back to the beginning there, you guys have such similar ideas and have built your platform so similarly based on that education and that information. And,
correct.
It's interesting to hear you talk about, as hunters, we're all different. We all have different tactics and different things. But we're really, when it comes down to it, I think, especially this day and age, all of us as hunters just want more and more information. We want to get better no matter what we're doing, as a whitetail hunter or a waterfowl hunter.
Yeah. Well, with today's lifestyles, everything's kind of a rat race, right? Everybody's in high-speed motion all day. Time is of the biggest premium we have. There's nothing more valuable than we have of time. And so when people invest money into something, they invest money into licenses, to guns, to bows, to arrows, and they go out into the outdoors, they don't want to waste their time. And now with the information highway we have of the internet and social media, it's right there for them to gobble it up, And I think me and Duke are on the same principle, is that, it's, you want to show entertainment, but really what we're into is really helping people be better outdoorsmen.
Yeah.
There's nothing more thrilling to have somebody send an email or a voicemail and say, hey, listen, I watched your video. I did something that worked. I just want to thank you. That's why we're doing it, and I think with today's hunter, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for a better outdoor experience, and they're looking for that information to give them that. And that's what I've always been about, and I think that's always what Duke's been about, and that's the bottom line for us, is how do we create a better outdoor experience for the guy that we know doesn't have a lot of time.
Well, and I think that's even super important now more than ever. Everybody wants to talk about youth getting involved in the outdoors and how our youth are going a different direction and things
absolutely.
like that. And, when a dad or somebody, a mentor takes a youth person hunting, they only have a certain amount of time to hook that kid.
Right.
It's
about that first experience.
Right. And if not, and if they don't get, a lot of times, if they don't get into it at a young age, they're probably not going to do it. They're going to go do other things, that are are, more immediately rewarding, for example.
Right.
But if you can do something to give them just a little better experience and hook them right off the bat, that's super important for our industry as a whole, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I remember my first time in the outdoors, and I just, said that first experience of that sound of those geese. And so much of it is about that first experience. And it's about that first experience in the outdoors. It's not about the first kill. It's what happened in the outdoors. And one of the best ways to have a great experience in the outdoors, whether it be waterfowl hunting, turkey hunting, deer hunting, is that communication with animals. It's such an awesome experience, and especially for a little guy that you're taking out or a little girl, to have them know that they were talking to this animal, communicating with this animal, whether you shoot it or not. I think that is an unbelievable experience. And I think if you go back and ask a lot of waterfowl hunters and deer hunters and stuff like that, and turkey hunters, it was that interaction with that animal, that gets you for a lifetime.
People do not realize that you can literally learn how an animal communicates. And if you learn how to reproduce that with a tool, and basically that's what Scott and I built our businesses on. It's not about just teaching people. We built instruments and tools that allow you to do that, where the other stuff that you bought, you couldn't do it.
Right.
Well, couldn't do it because it wasn't designed to do it. Okay, and that's what makes our products so much different.
Yeah.
But people have no idea that you can literally go out and speak to an animal, have that thing interact with you, and you can manipulate it to do what you want it to do. The better you get, the more things you're going to be able to do. But it's that experience that Scott's talking about. It's just so inspiring and so cool. Imagine sitting on your porch, you hear a sound. Let's just say it's a bluebird or a mourning dove,
chickadee,
and all of a sudden you just start making some kind of noise, and you start like, hey, I know what they're saying, and they're doing this for that, and blah blah blah, and all of a sudden you're like, say something to them, and all of a sudden that thing flies and sits on the windowsill. Now, how freaking crazy would that be? Yeah. That's what we do.
Yeah,
that's what we do.
And one of the cool things about communication with any kind of sport hunting, whether deer, turkey, whitetails, is that you can really fool an animal's ears. The eyes are the tough part, but the ears
and the nose,
with the nose with you guys, but with ducks and geese and turkeys and deer, you can really play with their ears. You can communicate with those animals because once you get their eyes and their nose involved, then it's a different game. But you can really play with their ears, and it has to be one of the best ways to get a first timer to have that experience in the outdoors, and it's something mechanical that they can use and they can be a part of and hang around their neck. It's just,
well, they did it.
Yeah.
They did it.
Yeah.
You did it. Yeah. The person did it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that, especially as a kid, you can practice with and you can fine tune and you can get good at. And especially now with what you guys have designed, the tools are out there and it's not that difficult to do, especially when you provide them with the education on how to do it,
It's one of the cheaper aspects of the hunt is the call. And it probably plays the biggest part in the hunt, one of the biggest parts.
Absolutely.
So it's deer call $30, a bow and arrow $1,500. And it's one of the less expensive ways to get someone into hunting that on the flip side is going to give you the biggest return.
Yeah, that's a very interesting way to put it. If you ask most people what the most important thing is, and that they take out to the tree or they take out to the woods, I would bet a lot of them don't say a call. But when you put it that way and you look at it that way, that's probably what creates maybe some of the most memorable experiences.
Oh, absolutely. And
But I'm going to tell you something about that statement you just made. We're starting to do more consumer shows where we actually directly interact with our customers and people. And the people that are coming up that have purchased our product and followed our information are saying exactly the opposite of the statement. And that's that if I forget my call.
Well, they're educated now.
I don't even, I'm just like, I feel like I'm wasting my time.
Right.
I'll literally want to go home, or I'll get down and go back to my truck and grab it. I will not sit in that stand because I know if a deer goes by, there's nothing I can do about it.
It's like forgetting your release.
It is, exactly.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah. In waterfowl hunting too, I get a lot of questions, what decoys should I buy?
Yeah.
Well, how good of a caller are you? Well, I'm average. Well, then you're just going to have average hunts. Because it all now with today's waterfowl, with today's duck and goose, it all comes down to calling. Almost 100%. You know,
I've been out of it for a long time, so I would literally have to go through about a 2 or 3 year period of relearning waterfowl. And that's really a kind of a point that people don't talk about either, Scott. How much it changes from year to year. So like say someone teaches you something and it worked 20 years ago. That don't work anymore. I'll guarantee you, because I was out of waterfowl for at least 10 to 15 years, about 10 years. And I went out and I did some of my old school stuff I used to do. Didn't work.
Didn't work. Yeah.
Didn't work at all.
Yeah.
And it's like, that was like a 80% win right there. On a loner, when you just mock him, go, bloop.
Yeah. Yeah, it's different.
80% of the time, that thing, boom, right in your spread. That doesn't work anymore.
Why is it changing so much? You think?
Pressure. Just people are more efficient at harvesting animals now, because of the information. There's better deer hunters than there ever used to be 30 years ago. There's better waterfowl hunters. The gear that we have, the bow and arrows moving at a certain speed, the scent. Your phase out. People are now scent controlled. Waterfowl hunting, you have these ultra realistic looking decoys. You got these calls that can sound just like a goose. You have these people practicing. So we're just more efficient at harvesting animals now. Well, in return, that puts more pressure on them. So in the waterfowl world, it's about an every 4-year change in technique and calling. We'll do something, try to keep it secret and use it for 3-4 years, and then it seems like it starts to other people pick up on it. They're doing the same thing, and then you got to change off. You got to try something else. The same thing with sounds, same thing with decoy spread change.
Sounds
it seems
too, because you're probably developing calls that have a different sound now than they did 10 years ago?
Yeah, just different sequences, different patterns, stuff like that. I remember when, the quick spit came out, and probably that's a name of a note that a goose does, is, 2009, 10-ish, and it was probably 2007-ish, and it was unbelievable for like 5 years. Like you just hit that, and it was like, boy, the goose had never heard that, except for from a live goose that came in. Then everybody started doing it, and it kind of just doesn't work the same anymore. So, it's about an every 3 to 4 year pattern that you can get out of it, and then you got to change it up, which keeps us better at, always evolving and being better. But that's the same thing with, I think all animals.
Yeah,
they're just
everything. It's all
absolutely
relevant. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Scott, you started obviously big into waterfowl. Have you transitioned into whitetail hunting at all?
Well, I'll tell you what. I think I started goose hunting 28 years ago. I started turkey hunting 20 years ago, and I remember it 2015. 4 years ago, I got this itch, and a lot of it came from Duke and JJ and Chris, because I would stop over, we were bouncing, business ideas and just, again, the connection, because you hunt the same, and they were coming out and doing this, the communication with the animal. The communication with the whitetail, which was something different than I had ever seen back in the day of watching videos, guy sitting there, deer walks by, he hopes, and, flings an arrow at it. And it's like, well, that, kind of looks fun, but kind of seems boring.
Yeah.
Because I was in the communication aspect. I wanted to make that animal do something because I did it, and these guys were, calling these deer, and Duke was like, dude, you can communicate with whitetails. I'm trusting you. And, it was kind of this 2, 3, 4 year prod. And I'm like, okay, all right, I'm going to give it a try. And so in 2015, got a bow and arrow, and I became a bow hunter. I started hunting whitetails.
Awesome.
Yes. And, well, story? You want to hear the story?
Well, we got to hear the story for sure, because I mean, I still cry when I hear it, but
yeah,
and I don't mean it in a bad way. It's just so funny because of the way it all transpired. But
right.
You know, a lot of that started because we just kind of banter Scott a lot, because we just go back and forth on stuff. And, oh man, you got to be able to do this, you know. And so we got him inspired, and so he I think he might have stumbled on a nice buck or seen one or whatever and got going. So he starts knocking on the door, making texts, making phone calls. Hey JJ, hey, you know. And so the information he's starting to suck out. He'd come in after work and we'd map out. Well, where is it and where's the wind predominant? You know, we're helping the guy.
It moved in a hurry. And I grew up on a dairy farm here west of town. And so when I decided I was going to get into whitetail hunting, I went around and, you know, knocked on doors of the local farmers, and I got on some really good whitetail property right away. You know, the one farm in particular that we're going to talk about, it was, you know, close to 700 acres, about, you know, 40% of that was hardwoods, and then 40% agriculture, and then about 20% grass. And so I got into this property, and it was one of my, you know, it's probably my third time sitting in a stand, right? And we go out and put this stand up, and I was talking to JJ and Duke and stuff, and they're like, well, just don't go barreling in there. You know, we're looking at this land, and they're like, just kind of put up an observation stand and don't get in there quite yet, because it's like the first part of October. You know, I think it was like, you know, right away in October. And so we go in there, and a coworker of mine, we put a stand up, and I'm sitting there, and I can see out over this property, and, you know, it's a nice evening, kind of warm. I mean, nothing, you wouldn't rank it as a good deer movement evening by any means, you know. And I'm just sitting there, and the lay of the land, if you kind of can visualize it, just imagine a big horseshoe. And the steel frame of the horseshoe is the creek, and 100 yards on each side of that is all woods. And then coming up, that's the low area. Coming up, it's grass. And then there's a big, you know, 300-acre cornfield on the top. And, you know, so the field sits high, and then it drifts off into the creek bottoms where the timber is. And, you know, this field is kind of jagged. It's got high grass moving in and out of it. And I'm sitting in the woods, the front of the woods, and I'm looking out. So the cornfield is like parallel with my eyes. You know, I'm not sitting above the corn, below it. It's just, I can kind of see it. And it's probably an hour before sundown. So pretty early in deer movement times, really. And I'm just sitting there, you know, I seen a coyote, he was chasing mice in the grass, and I'm just sitting there having a great time, because I'm soaking this all in, because it's one of my, you know, first times out in the deer woods. And, you know, of course I was way early. You know, I think I had been sitting there for 2 hours, you know, prior to that. You know, I'm tiptoeing around because scent control is new to me. Waterfowl hunter and turkey hunter, we don't have to worry about the nose. Right. You know, we just got to fool the ears and the eyes. And so, you know, get into stand, take my time, and, you know, it's about an hour before sundown, and I'm just looking around, just kind of taking everything, and it's quiet, you know, and all of a sudden I look up, and I'm scanning the corn, and it would look like if somebody, a big guy, took the middle base of the corn stalk and just went like this.
Shaking it.
That's how the corn was moving. And I'm like, whoa, it caught my eye right away, because, you know, early October, you know, the trees are just starting to change. Some are snapping off. That corn is starting to get that brown look to it. And these tassels are just like 3 of them, you know, and I'm like, what is that, you know? And so I look, and it's probably like 180 yards away from me, you know, and I look, and I'm looking through the bino, and instantly I just do this. And I'm looking, I'm like, oh my gosh, and all I can see is just horn, you know? And I'm like, oh, you know, and I'm instantly, you know, even though the wind's blowing the other way, I'm just freaked out at this time. You know, I'm like, this is incredible, you know, and he's in there a couple rows, you know, so I'm just kind of catching glimpse. But, you know, I've been around the outdoors and Duke, and if somebody shows me, you know, 150-inch deer, I can get probably within 5-6 inches of guessing, you know, the size on the most part. So it's not like I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a 300-inch deer by any means or anything like that. But so I'm looking at this deer, and he just keeps moving down the thing. And I watch his movements that night, and he finally steps out of the corn and he works down and goes down the other way. And by this time it transpired. I mean, he only moved, 100 yards through that corn in like an hour and a half. I mean, by the time he drifted out of the corn, it was dark, but I got a good look at him, from 180 yards. And, for us here in southeastern Minnesota right away, I mean, this is a buck of a lifetime. For us here, this is probably, he was a main frame, just 12 pointer, typical 12, great brows, good G2s, good all the way down the case. I probably had him pegged at, in the 160s.
I was going to say, it sounds like about a 160 plus.
Yeah, 160 plus,
for your first
deer encounter.
Well,
it's a deer. It's a deer of a lifetime for us here, And I think it's a deer for anybody of a lifetime. That's
absolutely
a great whitetail, and so I'm freaked out, and I'm climbing down the stand and I'm just, tipping toeing out of this woods, and I get back and I'm calling Duke, I'm calling everybody, and I've spent 25 years in the outdoor world, at this time, and this freaked me out, So I go in and we start talking to Duke and JJ, and we're pulling up the maps and we're pulling up the wind. They're like, well, where is he? Where was he bedded? When did you see him? And, we determined that this deer was bedding, the corn was standing early October, and it had these little fingers of high, just crap grass, that was great bedding grass, probably 8, 9, 10 feet high. And there was a finger that came into it was like an erosion ditch on that high cornfield. He was probably bedded in there, in that high grass, high next to that standing corn. So we kind of looked at the maps and looked at the wind, and JJ goes, well, what's in this finger here? Because it was a finger that went in, he got out, came around, and then kind of drifted down to another similar finger that stuck into this cornfield. And I go, well, those trees right there. And, when I'm in the outdoors, I'm very aware of what's going on, because that's how you become a better hunter. Understanding, for waterfowl hunting, the winds, the movements, you're just soaking it all in and hopefully registering that and remembering it so you can put it into action the next time it happens. So when JJ goes, well, what's this finger, which was the one 100 yards to the east of where he was bedded, I'd be like, no, you can't get in there. They're like, 15-year-old ash trees. They're like 18, 20, 23 feet high, 10-inch diameter. I said, you can't hang a stand in those.
Yeah, no.
And they had already lost their leaves. Ash trees lose their leaves really fast, but ash trees that I've noticed just in my short time are primarily one of the trees that bucks, make their rubs and their scrapes, because they're always overhanging a field and stuff like that. And I'm like, dude, you can't get a stand in that. It's like a 10-inch diameter. There's nothing to those ash trees. And he's like, well, if you want to kill them, that's where you got to be. And I was like,
I want to comment on that because I remember looking at that map and I remember him going through this process, and we're looking at it and there was no option.
There was no option.
This deer is going to get up out of his bed. He's going to naturally roam the way he did on that specific wind. And as he was talking about that finger, that was his stairway into the timber. And eating some acorns. It's time to start eating some acorns and things like that.
Yep.
And so we knew that that's what he was doing, but it wasn't going to happen during, you're not going to get him in that timber
during light.
During light.
Right. No, absolutely
so if you want
not.
to kill this deer, this is what he's going to do on this wind on this day, was me and JJ's assumption, but not being out there, we didn't know what he had to deal with. So I'll hand it back over to him.
So knowing that, Mike, the guy that works for me, kind of, pushed me into deer hunting a little bit too. So we go out there and, they're all like, you got to get that stand up on a northwest wind so the scent isn't blowing into where he is, and do it something nasty and be quiet. So we pick this day, and I mean, it was blowing a dog off a chain. It was raining. It was nasty out. And I remember going out there and just setting this up, and I'm looking around going, what in the blank are you doing, Scott? Why did you get into whitetail? I mean, this is ridiculous. I'm soaked. This ash tree, just a little ash tree, and I'm trying to put a stand up into it. We got the stand up. It was probably a perfect day to do it. Windy, rain, wash off all the scent. Well, this tree, like I said, wasn't very big. So we got the stand up there 9-10 feet in the air. It was about as high as we could go before, there was no tree left, and it was like in this little finger that was going into the cornfield, and the next finger to the west is the one he bedded in, which was probably 100 yards away, 90 to 100 yards away. And if you can visualize it, this finger, dropped into this little hole. So me being 9-10 yards up into the air made me parallel with the corn.
Yeah.
It wasn't like I was looking down in the cornfield and could see down the rows. It was like if I was on the ground, I'd be looking up at the corn. So getting 9-10 feet in the air made me parallel with the corn, So, and I remember it was October the 17th. It was a Wednesday night, I believe. And you can go back on your calendar. It might have been a Thursday, one of those two nights. We looked at the weather, and it was going to be a good north wind, northwest a little bit, blowing away from his bed, but where he quartered out and could still catch all the wind coming from the woods and stuff like that. And it was the start of a cold front. There was a good front moving in. I remember that day. It was chilly. It was cold. It was probably blowing, it was probably blowing 10 miles an hour, and it was probably a high of 45 that day. It was getting cold for early or mid-October now at this point. So I got in there super early, and I remember talking, what's our strategy for this? And they're like, Duke's like, you got to communicate with him. You got to give him something. I was like, what? He's like, here's the deal. He goes, about 5 minutes before sundown, go in there and act like you're two young bucks in a little sparring match. Because when we got in there and hung that stand up, that's where his rub was right there. I mean, it was trashed in there. You could see he was ripping up everything. And he's like, just get in there and just do a little sparring match. Like a couple young bucks, and then after they're done, just give them a little bit, nothing crazy. And I was kind of like all over that. I was like, yeah, that's cool. Now I'm going to communicate with this deer. Well, that's all fine, well, and dandy until you get in there and know that you're sitting this close to this animal. And then you're supposed to communicate. Like I locked up. I locked up because you don't want to mess it up.
Yep. You don't want to
just being around the outdoors, that, like I said, I think for any bow hunter, if 160 plus inch whitetail is buck of a lifetime. And I mean, it is, so you don't want to mess this opportunity up. And so the wind, and I'm sitting in this tree and I'm cold. I underdressed. Reality's kicking in like, oh my gosh, and I'm sitting there and, I'm looking at my watch. I'm like, oh no. It's the dreaded 5 minutes before sundown, and you can see the shadows start to get long, and the wind is coming, it's right in my face, and I'm sitting here and the corn's here and where he bedded would be over there. And right when I was going to reach for my black rack and the extinguisher, you just hear this. Have you ever heard a deer eat corn cobs off of corn? It's loud. And what happened, I think there was some does that were bedded in behind me in the corn a little bit off my west, and they were starting to get up and get active. So I said, all right, well, now's the time. And, I'm just like, oh God, don't mess this up, And so I take them and I'm like, well, I couldn't even hear that. With my black rack. I took my black rack out and I'm like, I don't want to mess this up. And I'm like, come on, Scott, you done,
A little louder.
And so I was like, okay, give him a little tingle, just kind of scrape him. And Duke goes, do it for about 30 to 45 seconds. Just this on and off little sparring match. And I got into it as I got a little more comfortable. I was like, okay, because I could still hear the deer. They stopped, and then, I would stop and I could hear, and I'm like, okay, they're fine with it, So I scraped those black racks together a little bit more, a little sparring match, and then I put them down, and then it was brr. And I'm like, brr.
Scared yourself.
I'm like, oh, okay, that's over. You know,
I did it.
Maybe, you know, I'm like, was that too loud? You know, everything's running through your head at this point when you're out in the tree with that kind of animal close by. And I'm like, you know, and then it starts to calm down about 30 seconds into it. I'm like, I think that sounded pretty good. You know, I think that was pretty real, you know, because I moved around the tree a little bit. So they were like pushing, because an animal's sense of direction on sound is crazy. You know, it's like turkey hunting. You can sound like a turkey standing there, but you start moving, you really sound like one, you know. So I kind of moved around the tree, and, you know, I gave a grunt this way and this way, you know, so try to mimic that movement, you know, in that those highs and lows from a distance. And I'm thinking, I think that sounded pretty good, you know. And with this wind, I think I did it loud enough where if he was in that bed that night, I think he definitely heard that.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting there, and, you know, and I'm getting back to that. Okay, it's starting to get chilly. It's about 3 minutes after I did that sequence. And I'm kind of looking, I'm listening to the deer, and I look up and boom. I'm like, and I just see this long nose sticking straight out of the corn, facing due north. And I'm looking, and it's dark and it's big, you know, big nose. And I'm thinking, is that him? You know, oh my gosh. You know, he's like 40, 45 yards. And he is parallel with my eyes right down the corn road. Because like I said, the corn comes in, comes down, and then it cuts into my little thing. So I'm looking, and he's parallel with my eyes, and this nose is sticking out. I didn't know if it was him yet or not. And I'm looking, and my bow's, you know, hanging right there. And I'm froze. I'm locked up. And he steps out and turns right at me. And it's him.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I'm just staring at this deer, and this deer's got an attitude. You know, you can tell by watching him, you know, no way that 10 days changed his attitude that much that time of year, I don't think.
Yeah.
Because, you know, he was moving through that corn, you know, 10 days prior to that, you know, eating. This deer, you know, he was throwing those shoulders around, and that head was just low. And I knew right away that I made this deer react to what I just did 3 minutes ago. And this deer comes in, and he's got his head right down. I mean, he's moving right at me. I can't move. You know, I'm standing there, and my bow's right there. You know, I didn't think it was going to be that quick, but it happened that quick, and he came out so close, 40 yards. He's just marching in, and he gets down, and he's got, he's got a scrape right below one of these ash trees. Oh. And I mean, this deer is just bringing it from the top and just, and he's just throwing that button all the way in circles. You know,
how far away is this deer now?
This deer is at 17 yards. This deer is at 17 yards away from me.
And you still don't have your bow in your hand?
And you're still locked up.
When his rear end got to me, because he was moving around this scrape. You know, he'd stop and rip the tree up, and he was moving around this scrape, and his butt was just swinging. And I just, you know, got the bow down. And I mean, I'll never forget trying to get my release knocked on. I mean, I'm doing this, and I mean, it's up here. I mean, it seemed like it
Parkinson's.
was just, it set in bad. I get it on, and you know, I got the wind perfect. So I knew, you know, he probably wasn't going to smell me, but he's at 17 yards away. Remember, this is like the fourth time I've deer hunted. Mm-hmm. And, 17 yards away, he's making this scrape. He gets up, and he's just ripping these tree branches, and he looks, and he's looking now, you know, to my south behind me, you know, past me. And I don't know if, you know, he was hearing those does in that standing cornfield, or he caught something, but he started, and he stepped down into the bowl with me, and was standing looking straight ahead. And I go, well, you know, he's kind of around this tiny ash tree. I said, I've really got nothing. And when he steps right behind me, it's over. You know, I mean, this deer is so close. You know, he's probably at 11 yards at this point, you know, and he's standing right over me, and I'm only 9 feet in a tree, you know, 9-10 feet. and it's not a very good tree. Like I said, it's a small ash tree.
Yeah, you can't move.
And all of a sudden, it looked like when he was going to take another step, something caught his ears, and he, you know, he's looking south, and all of a sudden he turned and he looked towards the northeast, and he's just staring. And I'm like, okay. And he turns his body and he starts walking now directly in front of me. And, you know, he kind of stops and he puts his head down. He's kind of sniffing something. And that's when I pull back. And I pull back and he's still just a hair to my left, you know. And what I mean by left is I can't just do this. Like my shoulder is tucked up on that ash tree where I can't, you know, lean around it, you know. And it was a quick, quiet draw, and the wind a little bit helped it, you know, with the noise. And he's sitting there, and he looks up, and he's looking right back at that spot. And I'm drawing back, and I'm not going to sit in here and say, oh, I was at full draw for, you know, 2-3 minutes. No, it was probably like, you know, 15 seconds, you know, which I think is a long time for a new bull hunter, you know.
Everything's in slow motion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Always seems like.
And I'm like, come on, man, just step out. And he starts walking. He starts stepping. And I mean, you know, I'm looking right here. He's quartering away at 9 yards. He's moving. And I'm like, well, I've seen it before. What do I do to make him stop? So I'm like, bah. And I did it, but again, it was so quiet. I'm like, I couldn't even hear that. Bah! And he stopped. But he didn't turn and look at me. He just stopped. And he was looking straight ahead. Well, the hunter in me thought, okay, he knows I'm here now.
Right.
So I got to fire. I got to let this arrow go. I remember standing there. I'm looking through and I'm like, you know, everything's going through my head. I'm like, am I even looking through the correct area? No, I'm serious. I'm like, I can't even find the dot I'm supposed to be using. Like, I don't know what's going on right now. And so then a natural instinct, you know, set in. It's like, Scott, just line this arrow up and drill him. You know, I mean, I'm like, this is so unbelievable. It's crazy. And this deer is at 10 yards, slightly quartering away, looking away from me. If you were to give a kid a cupcake, this is the best cupcake they would ever have. You know, I mean, you couldn't draw it up any better. And so I'm like, okay, I got to let it go. And I'm so excited. I'm anticipating. And I just went, thunk.
You pulled your hand down.
No, well, I didn't know that.
That's what you did.
I know that now. But I look at this deer, and the deer does not move. Nothing moves. And I'm looking, I'm like, I just hit this deer so hard. He doesn't even know I hit him. That's how bad I crushed this deer. That's what I'm sitting there thinking. I'm like, this is unbelievable. This deer is going to realize that I hit him so hard, he's just going to fall over and I don't have to do nothing. And I start looking at this deer. I'm like, well, where did I hit him? You know? And I'm like, I'm looking, and this deer is not doing anything. And I look, and you know, it's kind of getting darker now. And I look below the deer, and I can see my green arrow stuck into the dirt right underneath his stomach. And I'm looking, I'm like, no, that's not my arrow. You know, that's not my arrow. I'm like, that is my arrow. I totally missed this deer. And he's still standing there at 10 yards. I stuck it right into the dirt. And we had that rain and stuff before that, so it was soft. I mean, this thing just drove right in there with pry out, not even a sound. And I'm looking, and I'm like, I missed him. I absolutely missed him. And all of a sudden, that deer turns, and he looks directly at me. And I'm still in this stage. You know, I let it go, and I'm still in this stage because I didn't want to move. I'm just looking. Still holding my bow, and this deer is looking right at me. And I'm like, looking right at him.
Then panic sets in.
No, No panic sets in, because a part of me still thought I crushed him. I mean, I'm like, and listen, to go back, I did practice shooting my bow quite a bit. Yeah. As a new bow hunter, I was very confident out to 30 yards, and I said, I'll take a shot at 33, 35 yards. That's my max.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit here and tell you I was not going to shoot at a deer at 40 yards. I was first year bow hunter. Yeah. My breadbasket was, 15 to 25. I could pound them in there pretty good, but 30 was right at where I was comfortable. Well, this deer was at 10 yards.
Well, I guarantee you that you are not the first person to release and drop the hand to see where you hit the deer.
That was terrible.
I mean, that happens.
It was terrible.
Shooting.
Back to this majestic beast standing right in front of me. He looks just right at me. Looking right at me, right in my eyes, like staring a hole right through my soul. I was just looking at him, and he turns around.
It smells
and he starts smelling that arrow, and I'm like, "That is my arrow. that is my arrow. That just happened." And so he smells this arrow, and he kind of just looks around and looks up. And just walks away slowly. And he walks down the hill. And I mean, my body is in a state of almost shock. Like, it's cold. I just had to be still, all that adrenaline. And I hang my bow up. And I remember sitting down in this terrible tree stand. And I'm shaking so bad that I can't even think. I'm just...
Yeah.
Just doing one of these, I'm like, by that point, it's like I didn't even care that I missed the deer. It's like, how am I going to gain the strength to climb out of this deer stand?
The whole adrenaline.
Yeah, it's just, doing one of these deals. And I get out of the deer stand, I get back to my truck, and, part of me is so cool that the experience happened, but part of me is so mad. Yeah. And then a part of me is, do I have another shot at this deer? And I remember going into JJ and Duke the next day and just explaining what happened, and they're like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, and they're like, I think that deer's okay. I think he's going to be back in there. I'm like,
I don't think you bumped
I'm
him.
like, are you serious? I just shot and missed that deer at 10 yards. He looked directly at me, smelt my arrow, but he never... And the reason for it, he never gave me the sense like he knew I was there. Like, even looking at me, just the way he walked away. And, sometimes those deer, they're real smart and coy. Like those old does will be like, oh, I'm going to eat. No, I'm going to look at you. One of those deals. But this, he just kind of walked away, and I was like, okay. So 3 days later, I had another north wind on that deer, and I went back in there, and I seen that deer again that night. He came out, and instead of coming down into where, I took the shot at him, he came out and he came out later. He came out and he crossed down through the grass and went into the woods. He didn't keep tight to that corn. And, I ranged him that night, and he was, I think a lot of bow hunters probably would have took that shot. It was probably 40. I think it was at 42 yards, shorter grass he was in. It was a clean shot that still night. A lot of bow hunters would have took it, but I would have, no way I was confident in that shot.
You don't want to wound that, not after
not after I just missed the biggest cupcake in the world, So, and then the corn got cut on that property, and
then it's done.
Goose season kicked in, and that was my experience. And I'll tell you what, waterfowl hunting, turkey hunting, that was one of the most incredible experiences. And it really opened my eyes to what you guys were doing in the communication aspect, because 100% I made that deer get up and come into that little thicket like that with that kind of emotion and attitude. It really opened my eyes. It was an incredible experience.
But it's
terrible ending. But it was.
You know what? Every single deer hunter out there has a story like that. Everyone. I got one. I could go through mine too.
Yeah.
My very first deer that came in, and all the things.
It probably wasn't the right first deer to come in. Why not a doe?
My first year was similar to that, but I was gun hunting. I wasn't bow hunting. I was young. in high school or just out of high school. And I had an old bolt action Mossberg 20 gauge. And my buddy that was with me, he heard the shooting. He goes, well, that wasn't Mike. That was an automatic. Boom, boom, boom.
Oh, he let it go
That's
pretty
how
fast
I ripped off those rounds of that bolt action. I mean, the adrenaline is the heroin.
Yeah.
I mean,
I remember the first goose I shot.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
First goose I shot was out in Lutzy's out there west of town. And I shot once, and I knew I hit that goose. Yeah. First ever one. And I ejected the other 2 shells out of my gun without even shooting them. Remember it like it was yesterday, October 30th, 1993. Yeah, it was unbelievable.
People don't understand, we hunt, killing the animal, eating it. The process of the hunting is just our sport. We like that. We embrace that. But the hook is the interaction with those animals. And you can get that with a camera. I get it out at Yellowstone when we go out on vacations. When we see a grizzly bear, and we're getting video of it, and or you're communicating with something and bringing it in at any level that's the charge.
Yeah, that's
that's a big part of our connection too.
Right. Yeah, the communication with an animal, because like I said, those ears you can play with their ears, and it's just it was awesome. It was awesome.
That's awesome. It's a great story.
I still remember. I mean,
I don't want to say funny because I know.
It kind of was comical. I mean,
we're not laughing at you. We're laughing because we understand that whole process because we already went through it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you're teaching a young kid and he does something and you just kind of chuckle because
right.
What all happened. Well, you've already been through it. It's one of those.
Yep. You look at the learning curve that happened that night. I mean, literally, like, I don't want to say 5 years of learning happened within one night, but that's what almost it seemed like. The confidence in the calling, being close to their bedroom. Not just getting a deer, on a 2 a.m. picture and saying, I got a great deer on my property, and that's what I hope. I mean, the whole setting up where we should be, where he was bedded on that wind, his movement, and a lot of that came by luck that, didn't bust into the property. It was an observation stand, seen the buck, made a move, hunted him on the right weather, communicated with him. Everything was drawn up perfectly. I just missed the shot, obviously, but the learning curve of that, I mean, it was unbelievable to see a whitetail do those things.
Think about that, Scott. What happened there, okay? You're looking at, between JJ, myself, and all the people that, we work with,
right?
The amount of years of information that allowed us to help you.
Right. Yeah.
In that one short period of time. And how much you learned in that short period of time. I mean, you're doing that with these people that are goose hunting. You're giving them those decades of knowledge and information to help them be successful in that one scenario. And when you put that together, I mean, that's what we do. That's what the societies are, the Duck Society, the Goose Society, the Deer Society. That's what it is.
Right.
And that's, to be honest with you, I think, my fulfillment comes from it. Scott's does, as he said, but I think that's why it's just so successful, all of it.
Yeah, I mean, if I hadn't, known you guys, one, maybe not deer hunting, I probably might have not went, but two, the way that the whole process was set up. I mean, that's probably more than 5 years of learning. I mean, I would have barged right into that property, hunted it on the wrong wind, all sorts of different things probably would have went wrong where I probably wouldn't have even seen that deer again, but with information that's out there these days, it's right at the palm of your hand.
You do one thing wrong and you bump that deer and he knows your scent, it's over.
Yeah, it's over.
Well, one thing I want to bring up about that, a good point in that whole thing is the feeling that you felt before you called for the first time, at that deer.
Yeah.
And how nervous you were. And I think we all as hunters have been there, at some point. I know myself have been there, and you almost pick up, your black rack or rattling horns. Or when I was younger, it's like, oh, should I rattle? Should I not?
Yeah,
should I call? Should I not call? And you're so scared to make that commitment. Now you had a good teacher, obviously, with Mike and JJ, and you understood and they gave you that confidence to do that.
Right.
I think that's so important, and it's about understanding the right situations, when to call, when not to call. And if you can have confidence in doing that and understand that, then you add such a greater tool to your arsenal. It's just like if you go to the Deer Society app now, we have these instructionals on there where we go through a whole season of, early season, what kind of calling should you be doing? And go all the way through late season, and if you can learn that and become comfortable with that, and make those decisions, call,
Yeah. It's one thing it's very hard, especially in the deer, because you can't really see them. They're not making noise like a turkey, so you're just kind of,
waterfowl, you're reading what they do.
Yeah, exactly.
And do something and watch what they do.
And one thing that I've probably learned over the years is that a lot of people are hesitant to make sounds calling, and if they do make sounds, they do it very minimal. One thing that I've learned, whether it's with ducks, geese, turkeys, or deer, I think the more the better. The more realistic the better. And any animal, speaking more of turkeys and whitetails now, they got that bubble. They got their little home range, and if you can identify that and crack into it and communicate with them, it's a light switch, so.
That's what happened to you.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that's the challenge, like you said. How do I be confident at this? Because a lot of people, time is limited.
Yeah.
Their spots that they can hunt are limited. They might have that one deer they're after. They don't want to mess it up. It take confidence, but I think, it's just not afraid to fail. And the only way you really get truly good at something is by failing quite a bit at it. Because the times that you do try, it doesn't work. The times you do try and then it does work, you learn so much more, during that time. And that's what happened, in my instance, is that, hesitant at first, but now, no problem. I want to get in there and communicate. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I think we're gonna wrap things up. That's awesome, guys. If you're looking for great content, check out Scott, check out Molt Gear, Deer Society. Obviously, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe on there and download the free Deer Society app. But Scott, it was a pleasure. Great story, and hopefully we have you on here again soon.
Absolutely. Hopefully I don't have the exact story next time, but that's okay if I do.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thanks.